بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So today is lesson number 4 in the section to do with Al-Qadr, and it is lesson 39 overall in the series. And so in the previous 2 lessons we covered the levels of Al-Qadr, the various levels of the divine, what we call the divine decree. And we have a printout, a little leaflet, just to summarize the essence of the previous 2 lessons. So it summarizes the 4 levels: the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the writing of the decrees, the will of Allah, and the creative power of Allah in bringing things into existence, and some of the evidences from the Quran and from the Sunnah for those levels. So as we said before, we have to be clear, what is it that we are pursuing by way of these topics. In the first half of this book, we looked at the attributes of Allah, the divine attributes, and in the midst of confusion and controversies about this topic, then Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, he laid down many principles and foundations by which we can have a clear understanding of the topic of the attributes of Allah. This is something that, historically speaking, we know there have been controversies and deviation. This happened to the Jews, it happened to the Christians. They also, under the influence of Greek philosophy, they disputed and delved into the issue of the attributes of Allah, the attributes of the Creator. And so this also happened to the Muslim nation under the same influences: the philosophy of Aristotle, the philosophy of Plato, the ideas of Democritus, atomism and things like that. And so this entered the Muslim nation. And so the first half of the book, At-Tadmuriyah, deals with the attributes of Allah and clarifies the confusion and the deviation, and lays down solid principles by which we can have a good understanding of this topic and avoid the pitfalls and the mistakes and the doubts. Likewise, the second half of this book, of this work, is dealing with the decree and the legislation, the divine decree and the divine legislation. And what we are trying to understand here, what we are trying to achieve here is, first of all, to lay down the principles. So we've looked at the 4 levels of Al-Qadr, and then also to look at the fact that Allah Azza wa Jal, in creating His creation, He has placed ways and means, causes and effects. Right? So everything in creation which happens, there are causes and effects. We'll give some examples as we proceed through the lesson. And on the basis of these causes and effects, the ways and the means, there is legislation, there is law, there is legislation, whereby we are commanded to do certain things and we are prohibited from doing certain things. And that's because there are wisdoms behind these things. There are wisdoms behind these commands and these prohibitions. And that itself is based upon the fact that there are wisdoms within created things, meaning what Allah has created, there are wisdoms embedded within creation. And on top of that, there is the divine legislation of the law, through which the interests, the beneficial interests of mankind and their welfare and their well-being is achieved. And so the issue that we are resolving by way of this treatise is we are going to establish that there is no conflict between the divine decree, what Allah has decreed to happen, and the causes and their effects, and the mechanisms of creation and the properties of things, and between what He has legislated of the law, what He has commanded, what He has prohibited. That there is no conflict or contradiction between these two things. Rather, the two things are perfectly reconciled. And also that we avoid two extremes. We alluded to them at the end of the previous lesson. One extreme that claims that man has no choice in what he does. He is compelled and forced to do what he does. And so from here, the argument can be used to absolve blame from oneself. Right? To say, well, I sinned, or I killed, or I murdered, or I drank alcohol, or I fornicated, or I gambled, or I cheated and lied, because this was the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? This is now using the decree as an argument to justify actions you did, which you know full well that you had choice to do them or not to do them. No one compelled you to actually do those deeds. So this is one extreme, where you use the decree as an excuse for your actions. And so that's why at the end of the last lesson, we said that there are two groups of people. One of those is the Jabari, a sect called the Jabariya, meaning those who believe in compulsion, that there is no free will, there is no free will, and you are compelled to do what you do. This is one deviation in this topic. And then on the other side, there's some numerous other deviations. One deviation, which is the deviation of the Ash'aris. This is the name of a sect, the Ash'aris. And they believe that there are no inherent powers of causation in things. Right? So they deny the principle of causation in Allah's creation. Right? So this is foolishness, because evidence for causation is in the Quran, and it's known by experience that the fire burns, the water quenches thirst. Right? These are inherent properties of things, of either chemicals, molecules, forces, whatever. There are inherent properties in these things. And what they are basically saying is they are denying the inherent properties of these things. And they are saying, for example, that when you drink the water, it's not that the water has any quality which quenches your thirst. No, it's simply that when you drank the water, coincidentally, Allah created the quenching of thirst separately, and it had nothing to do with the water itself. Right? This is a deviation. It's a denial of the principles of cause and effect within Allah's creation. Right? Because what Allah created, there are inherent properties, there are effects to these things, there are properties, and this is how the creation functions. Right? So to deny causality like this is the height of foolishness. This is the Ash'aris, right? And then also another deviation, which is the deviation of a group called the Mu'tazila. So what they basically say, and this is based upon them trying to philosophize philosophize and to try to make analogies and to try to claim that what we understand to be justice in the creation, that it has to also apply to the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in essence, in a nutshell, what they are saying is that they say that we create our own actions outside of the power and control of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, outside the power and control of the Creator. So when we do deeds, we do them and they are completely outside the creative power and the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the reason why they say this is because they believe that it would be unjust to reward and punish if Allah is the creator of the actions. Right? So in essence, where this led them to is a belief very similar to the Magians or the fire worshippers, those who believe in two gods, the God of good and the God of evil, right? The God of light, which is the God of good, and the God of evil, God of darkness, and that good happens by way of the God of good, and evil happens by way of the God of evil, right? So it resembles that statement, and it's also a deviation. It's also a deviation in the topic of al-qadr, in this issue that we are looking at. So this is just really to put into context what are the doubts and the misconceptions, what are the issues that we are clarifying by way of this subject matter and this topic. Right? So the first thing that we have to have very clear is to know and understand the four levels of al-qadr. Now, continuing from where we left off, right at the end of the last lesson, the Shaykh, rahimahullah, he alluded to two groups of people. The first group is the Jabari, right? The Jabari. This is the person who goes and he, for example, like I said, he kills, he cheats, he lies, he murders, he avoids his obligations, right? He doesn't pray, doesn't fast, doesn't do the obligations like fulfill the rights of his parents and so on and so forth. And then he says, well, this is al-qadr. This is the decree of Allah, right? So he uses that as an argument. And then on the other hand, there is another group on the other extreme, and they say that everything I did, my riches, my cars, my palaces, my skills, my wealth, my property, all of that, I did it on my own. I created this purely out of my own ingenuity, my power, my effort, my striving, my skill, right? Outside of the domain of Allah's creative power. This makes a person to inherit arrogance and to inherit, becoming amazed with yourself and your abilities and your powers. And you deny that this is itself, it is from the bestowal of Allah and from the creation of Allah, right? So so this is to the other extreme, where it leads a person to the other extreme. Now, we should look at these, inshallah, in a bit more detail further down the line in future lessons. For now, this is just like a basic introduction to some of these deviations. But these people who deviated in al-qadr, in the issue of the divine decree, the ones who negated the divine decree, at the very beginning, when this group first appeared in the Muslim nation, in the time of the companions, they came from Iraq. And in Iraq, as we said, many of these deviations, they occurred because people were mixing with the Jews, with the Christians, with the Hindu philosophers, with the Persians, and debating and arguing and picking up things from these people, which they then carried into Islam. One of those things was this issue of the denial of the divine pre-decree. And this came by way of a Christian into Islam through Al-Ma'bad, through a man called Al-Ma'bad Al-Juhani. And so initially this deviation asserted that Allah does not have prior knowledge. Allah does not have prior knowledge of events. So Allah only knows a thing happens after it has occurred. Okay? So this was an extreme view that first entered the Muslim nation. However, it did not last for very long. And that's because this very explicitly opposes the texts of the Quran and the Sunnah, very explicitly. And so this group did not last for long. And this is clear, explicit disbelief. It is disbelief, because it is a denial of very clear, explicit statements of in the Quran. So what happened afterwards is the Mu'tazila in the 2nd century of Islam, they acquired and adopted, or they spoke with this belief. They affirmed that Allah knows all things before they occur, and that all the decrees are written down. However, they denied that Allah wills and creates everything. Right? They denied the 3rd and the 4th level of Al-Qadr, of the divine decree. Right? So they said, well, no, we create our own actions completely outside the power and the will of Allah. Our actions are they are completely outside the domain of Allah's creative power. We create our own actions, basically. And with respect to these people, the Shaykh goes on to say that he mentions the statement of Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah, and he said, Imam al-Shafi'i said, ناظروا القدرية بالعلم. And what this means is that if you debate with these people, if you argue with these people, then argue with them on the basis around the issue of knowledge, Allah's knowledge. Right? If you start from this point, you can very easily refute these people. So how does the argument go? The argument is to say, that does Allah have prior knowledge of your deeds? And if they say yes, he had prior knowledge, then you can say, well, if he had prior knowledge, then that means nothing happens except due to his will. It has to happen by way of his will, right? Because he knew that they were going to act, and he willed for them to act. And if they accept the issue of knowledge, then you have undermined their position, right? Because they deny Allah wills and creates the actions of the servants. So if you force them to say, yes, Allah has prior knowledge, then automatically you have to accept that nothing occurs except by his will, right? Because his will follows on from his knowledge. In any case, this is the kind of argument. The Shaykh brings some verses in the Quran as evidence. وَخَلَقَ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ وَهُوَ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمٍ. Right? He created everything, and he has knowledge. He has knowledge of all things. So this is just like a small point that the Shaykh mentioned just to finish off the previous discussion. We're going to move on. There are some other kind of technical issues I'm going to leave over the next couple of pages. But just to finish off on that note, this is from the previous lesson that we are finishing off. A few things. Deviation in Al-Qadr. One extreme are those who say that we are compelled to do what we do, therefore we cannot be punished because it's outside of our control. The other extreme are those who deny the divine decree and claim that we create our own actions outside the domain of Allah's will and His power. This is another deviation on that side. And some of these people, they, at the initial stages, they denied that Allah has prior knowledge of all events. This only lasted for a short while, and then these people kind of disappeared. And then the Mu'tazila came along, and they held that, yes, Allah knows events before they're going to happen, and yes, they are written down, but we will and create our own actions completely outside of Allah's creative power. So they affirmed the third and the fourth levels of Al-Qadr. So with respect to these people, we argue with them by starting with the issue of knowledge, and then everything else naturally follows. They are forced to accept that whatever they do, whatever deeds they do, it is by the will of Allah, and it is under the creative power of Allah. So once we've finished all of that, we are now going to move on. So this was a completion of our discussion to do with the four levels, right? So now we are moving on to the next aspect or next element of the discussion. And this is now to do with how Al-Qadr, so the Shaykh says, Al-Qadr لا ينافي الأسباب القدرية الشرعية التي جعلها الله تعالى أسبابا فإن الأسباب من قدر الله تعالى وربط المسببات بأسبابها هو مقتضى الحكمة التي هي من أجل صفات الله عز وجل والتي أثبتها الله لنفسه في مواضع كثيرة من كتابه. So the translation of that is that Al-Qadr, right? So when we believe in Al-Qadr, along the lines mentioned, this does not negate or oppose the creational ways and means, nor the legislated ways and means. Right? So there are the creational means, right? Meaning that within creation, everything happens by cause and effect, by ways and means, right? So all entities, everything physical, power, force, molecule, substance, and its properties, the creation operates by way of causes and effects. And also, there are the legislated ways and means, right? Meaning things which are legislated, such as prayer and fasting and charity and benevolence and kindness to parents, to neighbors, these are the ways and means which are legislated by which we enter into paradise and, in the hereafter. So Al-Qadr, our belief in Al-Qadr, that Allah has knowledge of all things, that He wrote down all things to happen in His creation, that He wills things to occur, and then He brings those things into existence through His creative power, these four levels. Our belief in all of these things, in no way does it clash or contradict with the fact that there are causes and effects within creation, and that there are causes and their effects in legislation, in the law, right? There's no clash between any of these things. And so the Shaykh goes on to elaborate and explain this in a bit more detail, so we'll read through this. So he says, Al-Qadr, our belief in Al-Qadr does not negate the causes. Because if a person was to say for example, you say, well, I'm not going to take the means, because if what Allah has decreed for me is going to happen, then it's going to happen. And if Allah has not decreed for it to happen, then it's not going to happen. So why should I take the means then, if everything is by the decree of Allah? Right? So this comes back to the argument. This now shows a deviation in thinking. And, the person says, look, if I was to, even if I was to do the, take the ways and means, then, it might not happen or whatever. So basically, this is like a type of argument, as we said. The Shaykh says this is not correct, because the ways and means, as we said, whether legislated in the Sharia or whether worldly, in terms of the worldly creational affairs, this does not negate al-qadr, because they themselves are from the divine decree, right? All of the causes and their effects, whether legislated or whether creational, they are part and parcel of the decree of Allah, because it is from the wisdom of Allah that He ties causes to their effects, and that events and affairs happen either because of a reason or a cause. Right? Now the Shaykh gives an example to illustrate this point very clearly. Imagine someone comes along and he says, look, I love children, I love to have a child. I want children. So you say to him, well, okay, then you need to marry, and you need to get married, you need to take a wife, and you need to have relations, you need to have conjugal relations, so that you can have a child. This is a very clear example. So if a person was to say, well, if I was to seek marriage in order to have a child, this would contradict or make my belief in the divine decree to be deficient. Right? Because if I truly believe that whatever Allah wills is going to happen, and whatever Allah does not will is not going to happen, and I truly believe this, then why would I go and get married in order to have a son, to have a child? And then we say to him, well, this is not correct. This thinking is not correct. Because the way that you have a child has been decreed by Allah. Allah decreed and created His creation that He made a child to occur by way of a cause and effect, which is by way of conjugal relations within marriage. So unless you do that, then you will not have a child. And you doing that is from al-qadr. It is part and parcel of al-qadr. Because when we speak of the divine decree, as we said, the divine decree does not happen except by way of the created causes and their effects. So there can be no clash. There is no contradiction. You can't say, I'm hungry, I'm starving, and if Allah has willed for my hunger to be removed, then it's going to happen anyway. So why do I need to eat? Right? And so this is an erroneous way of thinking, because Allah has created His creation in such a way that hunger is only removed by way of taking food. So if you took food, then this is from what Allah has decreed, and this does not clash with your belief in al-qadr, that whatever Allah wills is going to happen, whatever He does not will is going to happen. Right? This does not clash with that belief. So you take the food because it is part and parcel of al-qadr. And when you take the food and your hunger is removed, then all of it is from Allah's decree. Right? So these two examples, they clearly illustrate the erroneous nature of this thinking. Right? You can't use al-qadr to claim that to avoid taking the means. Now on the next page, what the Shaykh does, rahimahullah, is going to give us another example of this to illustrate, and it's a well-known, famous example that we'll stick to, inshallah. And this is the famous hadith regarding Umar bin al-Khattab, the second caliph after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and its in relation to the occurrence of the plague, right? An outbreak of the plague in the region of Syria in Sham. And so what happened is Umar bin al-Khattab, as is mentioned by Abdullah bin Abbas radiallahu anhuma, that Umar bin al-Khattab went out on an expedition, and he went to Sham, Syria, until they came to a place called Sarg, like an area. And here he met up with the military leaders, his military leaders who were stationed in that place. And what happened is they informed him, Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah and others who were the military leaders. They told him that basically there was an epidemic or a plague that broke out in a region of Syria. And Ibn Abbas said, so Umar bin al-Khattab, he sought to consult with the muhajirun, right, who are the emigrants, the first of the Muslims, right? They had precedence in Islam, they were greater in knowledge, and so he consulted with them, and they said to him, look, they said to him as well, look, an epidemic has happened in Sham. And then they differed amongst themselves. Some said, well, you've come out on an expedition, and we hold that you shouldn't return, you should continue. And others amongst the Muhajirin said, well, we think you should turn back and not advance to the place of the plague. So then Umar bin al-Khattab said, bring to me the Ansar. Right, this is now another group of Muslims, the Ansar. And he sought consultation with them. And they differed amongst themselves. Some said, well, yes, we believe, since you've come, you might as well continue. And others said, well, no, because you've got people with you, you should turn back. And then he said, bring to me the most senior of the Quraysh, the most senior of the companions who are from the Quraysh and who participated in the conquest of Mecca, right? Who were there in the conquest of Mecca. So this really now is the senior scholars amongst the companions. So he also consulted with them, and what they said that basically we believe that you should turn back with the people and not advance to this place where an outbreak has happened. So then Umar bin al-Khattab, he left the people overnight, and then he came back in the morning. And when he came back and he made the decision to go back and return, one of the companions called Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, who was the military chief, he said, are you fleeing from the decree of Allah? Are you fleeing from what Allah has decreed? And so Umar bin al-Khattab, in his deep knowledge, he said, if only someone other than you had said this, O Abu Ubaidah, meaning that I wasn't expecting you to say the likes of this. And then he said, yes, what I am doing is from the decree of Allah, because, as he says, نَفِرُّ مِنْ قَدَرِ اللَّهِ إِلَى قَدَرِ اللَّهِ, we flee from the decree of Allah to the decree of Allah. And then he said, do you not see, if you entered into a valley with your camels, and you saw that one part of the valley had vegetation, and the other part of the valley had no vegetation, then if you chose to go to the valley with vegetation, that would be from the decree of Allah. And if you chose to go to the part of the valley without any vegetation, that too would be from the decree of Allah. Right? So, meaning what he's saying, that if I turn back and I leave and I don't advance to the land of the plague, well, this itself is from the decree of Allah. So I'm not fleeing from the decree of Allah, but this is from the decree of Allah. And so then, as this was happening, another companion called Abdurrahman bin Auf, he came, and prior to that he was engaged in some, in some personal affairs. And he came and he said, actually, I have some knowledge about this from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he said, I heard the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam say, when you hear of a plague occurring in a land, then do not advance to it. And if it occurs in a land in which you are present, then do not leave it intending to flee from the plague. And so then Umar bin al-Khattab, because he was happy that something from revelation came and confirmed the decision which he had made, which is to turn back and not to advance to the land of the plague. Okay, so why did the Shaykh mention this example? He mentioned this example to show that this is a clear example where to avoid danger is to take the means. And taking the means does not contradict or clash with belief in Al-Qadr. Rather, it is from Al-Qadr. It is from belief in Al-Qadr to take the means. And in this particular example, as the Shaykh has mentioned this hadith, this is to do with the plague and to do with contagion. And the people have differed, scholars have differed over this issue as relates to the issue of contagion itself. But many of the scholars, they explained that in this hadith there is no evidence for, this is not, what this shows is not that Umar bin al-Khattab, fled from contagion, so to speak, right? The meaning of this hadith is along the following lines. If you imagine there's a burning house or a burning street, and you are traveling, through the town, then obviously you are going to not want to go through the burning street, right? Because it is a place where you could be subjected to burning or, harm or something, breathing in fumes or something like that. Or even a burning house, a burning building. There are people inside, and you obviously are not going to run inside because it's, why would you subject yourself to the same calamity that the people are being? So you wouldn't do that, right? In the same way, if there was a treacherous river, a part of a river which is treacherous, meaning it's very dangerous, and there are people who went in and they're drowning, trying to cross the river, then obviously you are not going to go into the same place for fear of drowning, right? It's from this angle that Umar bin al-Khattab did not advance to the land of plague, right? It's not because he was scared that if I go to the land of the plague, then someone is going to transmit his plague to me for fear of contagion, right? That's not the reason, because Umar bin al-Khattab himself, as is related in other reports, that he would drink from the same vessel as Mu'aqib, who is his treasurer. He was a treasurer, and he had leprosy. He suffered leprosy. And so he would take from the vessel that Mu'aqib drank from, take it and drink from the very same spot in order to dispel the notion of contagion from his mind. Right? So Umar bin al-Khattab didn't turn back from the land of the plague because he was scared somehow that if I went there, some person might transmit the contagion. No. It's a bit like saying, if there's a house full of people and the building is burning, then you decide, well, I'm not going to go into the house because if I go into the house, maybe one of the people who is burning, he's going to transmit his burning to me. So I'm not going to go into the house. And nobody thinks like that, right? Or, well, I'm not going to jump in the river to cross the river because there are people who are drowning, and if I join them, maybe one of them is going to transmit his drowning to me by contagion. No, it's because you don't want to be subjected to the same reasons which are leading them to be drowned, right? Which is the river. And likewise, you don't want to enter the burning building because you don't want to be burned by the same causative factors that are causing the people to be burnt, right? Likewise, you do not want to go into a land where disease has happened because of whatever reasons and factors by the decree of Allah, that you don't want to subject yourself to the same reasons. That's why he turned back, not out of belief in or fear of contagion. And so there are from the scholars who explain this in relation to these ahadith, such as Ibn Hajar and At-Tahawi and other than them. And there are from the scholars who take this hadith as an evidence for contagion, for belief in contagion. But anyhow, this is the reason why the Shaykh mentioned this as an evidence. It shows that taking the ways, taking the means does not contradict belief in al-qadr. Right? Rather, because the ways and the means themselves are from the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, this is in relation to obviously created things, right? And as the Shaykh says, it is from the wisdom of Allah that Allah Azza wa Jal has tied causes to their effects. Right? So in this creation, there are many, some very, very simple examples. Allah created the sun, and He made the sun to have such properties that it has certain effects. For example, through it there is plant life and vegetation. Through it there is what we experience as the day, right? Through it is warmth. Through it is light. So it is a means for other things. Similarly with water. Water is a means for many things. Life is based upon water. Quenching of thirst, all plant and vegetation, and so many other things. Fire, there's likewise with the winds. All of these are very obvious things that we experience with the senses, that Allah has created them and tied other things to them. Right? So we believe this, and we believe that all things in Allah's creation, which are from His decree, that within those things there are created things to which Allah has tied other things, right? So in other words, what we are saying is that we believe in the systems of cause and effect within Allah's creation. There are systems, interconnected systems of cause and effect within Allah's creation, right? And these connections between causes and their effects is a reflection of Allah's wisdom. Right? And this is a clear evidence for the existence of a creator and a maker who is the one who created the causes and the effects and tied them together. Right? And this is from the clearest of evidences when we look in creation and we see all of these interconnected systems of cause and effect through which life operates, functions, and so many other things arise and come to be, and behind which there are clear objectives, goals, and beneficial interests for mankind. This is undeniable, right? It's undeniable to see this in creation. Now, from here, the Shaykh goes on to give us evidence for these two types of causes: the creational causes and the legislated causes. And that's what we're going to look at next, right? So from the Quran, the Shaykh says, mentioning in the text, فَمِنَ الْأَسْبَابِ الْقَدَرِيَّةِ. So from the creational causes is what Allah has mentioned in the Quran. Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, اللَّهُ الَّذِي يُرْسِلُ الرِّيَاحَ فَتُثِيرُ سَحَابًا فَيَبْسُطُهُ فِي السَّمَاءِ كَيْفَ يَشَاءُ وَيَجْعَلُهُ كِسَفًا فَتَرَى الْوَدْقَ يَخْرُجُ مِنْ خِلَالِهِ. To the end of the ayah. فانظر إلى آثار رحمة الله كيف يحيي الأرض بعد موتها إن ذلك لمحيي الموتى وهو على كل شيء قدير. So here, this is a passage from Surah Al-Zumar, Surah 39, verses 48 to 50. Here Allah Azza wa Jal says, Allah is the one who sends the winds, and the winds give rise to the clouds. And the winds give rise to the clouds. And then the clouds spread in the sky, however Allah wills. And then He makes the clouds to be piles, like they become masses and piles. And then from them, there comes rain, which comes out from them. And then in the verse that continues, Allah says, so look at the effects, the traces of Allah's mercy, how He revives the earth after its death. Indeed, that is the giver of life to the dead, and He has power over all things. Okay, there are a number of things mentioned in these two verses, in this passage. Right, the first thing which is mentioned is the fact that it is the wind, the sending of the wind, that it causes or it plays a role in the formation of the clouds. Number one. And secondly, that rain is a cause or a means of the earth being revived. Right? Now this is something that we clearly observe and we clearly see. You know, we see dead earth, dead land. The rain comes. After the rain comes, you see life springs out of the earth. Okay. What is established in these two verses is that both of these things are creational causes. They are creational causes. Right? So the clouds are caused in part by the wind, and the revival of the earth is caused in part by way of the water. And then there are other things as well. Obviously the soil itself, and then there are things in the soil, then there is the heat, and all these other things. There's a mixture of causes and their effects. But the point being that within Allah's creation, whatever happens, it happens by way of systems and cause and effect, which Allah has tied together. So this means that the causes are from Allah, the effects are from Allah, and the tying of those two things are from Allah as well. Right? All those things being tied together. They are from Allah as well. And it is on account of a wisdom. Right? So all of these connections of these ties have been made on account of wisdom. Right? So for example, that's why we see different things having different properties. The water has certain properties. Fire has certain properties. Air has certain properties. The grass has certain properties. Every single thing, Allah has tied these things and created them and given them their own properties due to wisdoms, right? And Allah does not do anything except for a wisdom that necessitates it. For a wisdom that necessitates it, right? So, this was an example of what? Of creational causes and effects. So everything we see in creation, then, there are causes and effects. And obviously, in the Quran, Allah Azza wa Jal makes mention of things that everybody can observe and witness, because the Quran is for every person, and it's what every person experiences that gives evidence to him for Allah's existence. But there are many other things in Allah's creation, things which are hidden, and that's why we believe as part of Al-Qadr that Allah created everything, whether it's small or large, hidden or apparent, right? There are many things which are hidden in Allah's creation. There are latent powers, there are forces, there are waves, and that's why today, for example, we're able to communicate by way of transmission of sound and data and things like that, because within Allah's creation there are mechanisms that He has put that allow us to communicate in this way. So everything is by the qadr of Allah. This is what we say, that everything which happens, it is by the decree of Allah, because Allah has created these ways and means, causes and their effects, which we can study and investigate and harness for our benefit. So whether it is apparent, like the sun, the rain, or whatever, or whether it is hidden and not yet discovered, all of it is from the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is now the creational ways and means. Now we're going to look at the legislated ways and means, right? So what's the difference? The creational ways and means, what Allah has created, it is how everything in creation functions, right? Whether we are speaking of minerals, metals, whether we are speaking of biological life, whether we are speaking of chemical reactions, whether we are speaking of electricity, everything, all things within Allah's creation, all entities, powers, forces, substances, everything. All of it is by the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it operates by way of causes and effects which have been tied together. Likewise, when it comes to the law, what Allah has legislated, then how do we enter paradise? Right? So just like in the creational sense, how do we remain alive? How do we remain healthy? How do we achieve our worldly beneficial interests, such as acquiring wealth and property and livelihood? All of these are from the creational ways and means. In the same way, how do we enter paradise in the hereafter? And how do we avoid punishment in the hereafter? It is by way of the legislated ways and means which Allah has legislated. Then this now is the law, the Sharia. Right? Things like prayer and fasting, kindness, charity, and all the other various deeds. So what is the evidence that there are legislated ways and means which are necessary to follow, just as there are creational ways and means which are necessary to follow? Right? So the evidence is, the Shaykh says, وَمِنَ الْأَسْبَابِ الشَّرْعِيَّةِ قَوْلُهُ تَعَالَى قَدْ جَاءَكُم مِّنَ اللَّهِ نُورٌ وَكِتَابٌ مُّبِينٌ يهدي به الله من اتبع رضوانه سبل السلام ويخرجهم من الظلمات إلى النور بإذنه ويهديهم إلى صراط مستقيم. So here in this verse, this is Surah Al-Ma'idah, chapter 5, verses 15 to 16. Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, there has come to you from Allah a light and a clear book. Allah guides through it. Allah guides through it whoever follows His pleasure to the paths of guidance and safety, and He removes them from the darknesses into the light by His permission, and He guides them to the straight path. Okay, what is the point of evidence here? Allah said, Allah guides them, yahdi bihillah. Allah guides them through the book, by way of the book, meaning that the guidance of mankind is by way of the book He revealed to the Prophet, and in general to the books He sent to the previous prophets and messengers, to Isa alayhi salam, the Injil, the Gospel, to Musa alayhi salam, the Torah, to Ibrahim alayhi salam, the scrolls of Abraham, right? So by way of revelation, that's permissible to delay the prayer when for the purpose of teaching. So Ibn Abbas, he used to delay the prayer all the way to Isha when he was giving a lesson. So this is one of the things which is totally permitted. We are allowed to delay the prayer even if we went on till Isha. No, that's okay, it's fine. It's good to raise it so then everybody knows, you see. So where were we? Oh yes. So the revelation of the law, what Allah has sent down, what Allah has revealed, then this is the legislation through which Allah guides mankind. Which means that there are legislative causes through which we are guided and then we enter into paradise. So within the law of Allah, so as the Shaykh goes on to say, that the book which Allah revealed is from Allah. Allah guides through it whoever seeks His pleasure. Right? So the revelation is a cause, is a sabab. There's causality, right? How do people enter paradise? Through the causality of revelation which Allah revealed. That's the cause. And so likewise, you single out Allah in worship, tawheed, and you pray and you fast and you do righteous deeds and you give charity and you take care of the orphan and you be respectful to the parents and all the other virtuous deeds which benefit you, which benefit the society and which please Allah Azza wa Jal. These are the legislated causes through which you enter into paradise. So the Shaykh says, so this is what we mean by the asbab, as-sabab. What is the definition of a sabab? A sabab is that by which one reaches something else, right? Something which is a means to something else. So the rain is a sabab. The rain is a means to what? To vegetation and life. The sun is a sabab to what? To, again, heat, energy, and so many other things. This is what Asbaab means, that which leads to something else, which is, by which one leads, reaches something else. So from now, from here then, it should be very clear, if someone was to ask, do the created and legislated means, do they clash with al-qadar? Do they negate al-qadar? And the answer is clearly no. Because Allah Azza wa Jal has ordered us to take the ways and means, whether they are creational or whether they are legislated. Right? To give you an example of each one, Allah Azza wa Jal, He said, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "Man ahabba an yubsata lahu fi rizqihi wa yunsa'a lahu fi atharihi falyasil rahimah." He said, whoever amongst you wants his provision to be enlarged and his lifespan to be increased, his age to live longer basically, then let him keep the ties of kinship. Keep good ties with your family, your blood relatives, and your provision will be expanded and your age will be prolonged. Right? So here, this is now one of the means, the worldly means. And we have been commanded in the Sharia to take these means, right? Which lead to certain effects. This is one clear example. And another example is the issue of medicine. So, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Ash-shifa fi thalathatin, fi shartati mihjamin, aw shurbati asalin, aw kayyatin binar, wa ana anha ummati anil kay." So he said, healing lies in three things: either in the cupping, the cupping of a, the cupping, the wet cupping that people do, or in a drink of honey, or cauterization with fire. However, I prohibit my nation from cauterization. Okay, so again, this is something which is recommended to take the means when it comes to illness and taking medication or treatments. None of this clashes with the divine decree, right? You don't say, I have a cut and a wound, and if Allah wills, I will not be, if it's going to, like you have dirt and filth, and you need to cleanse the wound, otherwise you'll get, it'll lead to sepsis, into the blood if you don't clean it properly. Right? So you don't say, well, if Allah wills, then whatever's going to happen is going to happen to you. No, you take the means, right? You cleanse the wound, or you take whatever means possible. So none of this clashes with the divine decree, right? So all of these are from the ways and means which are creational, which are perceptive, such as eating and drinking and marrying in order to have children. All of these things do not clash with al-qadr. And the person, as the Shaykh goes on to say, that those people who deny that the causes have effects, right? Those who say, look, don't go and earn a living, don't earn a provision, because whatever Allah's will is going to come to you anyway. So why bother? Right? And they say, وَمَنْ يَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حَسْبُهُ. Whoever relies upon Allah, then Allah will suffice him. So sit in your home and your sustenance is going to come to you. The Shaykh says, in reality, these people are misguided in religion and they are foolish in their intellects. Right? People who speak like this, they are misguided in religion and they are also foolish of mind. They are foolish in their intellects. As for them being misguided, then they are misguided in religion because Allah Azza wa Jal and His Messenger have clearly commanded the people to take the ways and the means, right? Whether in worldly matters or whether in religious matters. And as, like for example, Allah Azza wa Jal says in the Quran, هُوَ الَّذِي جَعَلَ لَكُمُ الْأَرْضَ ذَلُولًا فَامْشُوا فِي مَنَاكِبِهَا وَكُلُوا مِنْ رِزْقِهِ. Allah said, He is the one who made the earth subjected for you. So traverse to the ends or to the parts of the earth and eat from the provision of Allah. So what did Allah say? He said, go out, traverse, and get the provision of Allah and eat from the provision of Allah. The Shaykh says, Allah did not say, ilzamul masajid wa kulu min rizqih. Allah did not say, stay in the mosques, just worship, and then eat from the provision of Allah. He didn't say that. He didn't say, stay in your home, stay in the mosque, just worship, and that's it, and then your provision will come to you. No, he said, go out in the earth, go out, spread to the various places, meaning seek your provision, earn a living, and eat from what Allah has, from what He has provided. So the Shaykh says, those people who speak like this, they are foolish of intellect because they deny the fact that causes have effects and effects are tied to causes. So they're really inviting towards laziness and laxity, and all of this is incorrect because, if a person is genuinely unable to earn a living, a person might be disabled, a person might be whatever, then yes, whatever Allah has decreed is going to reach that person. But for a person who's able-bodied, then this does not mean that you sit around and do nothing, because whatever Allah has decreed for you is going to come by way of you taking the ways and means. So, this kind of brings us to the end, and there's a final point here that we'll leave now, inshallah, which is that when we speak about, we'll take this issue up in the next lesson. We've said the ways and means, creational or legislated. But we have to qualify this with an important word, which is authentic and verified, right? As-sahiha. When we speak of religious legislated, the legislation, then it has to be authentic. Otherwise, anybody can claim anything about acts of worship. Do you understand? Right? So, Asbaab, al-Asbaab al-Shar'iyya, those ways and means which are from the Sharia, they have to be authentic. They have to be sahiha. We have to have evidence from the religion. Otherwise, anyone can come along and say, well, no, if you stand in the rain for 3 hours doing dhikr, this is a means for having children. Well, where did you get this from? Where do we find this from? There's no evidence for this. Anyone can make anything up. Do you understand? So we have to qualify the means very importantly, that those which are legislated from the Sharia, the acts of worship, they have to be sahiha. And as far as it relates to the creational ways and means, then they have to be established empirically with evidence. Right? So this now comes into the ways and means, and now we are looking at things that we study, the physical aspects, the chemical aspects, the ways and means, medicine, biochemistry. Ways and means have to be verified empirically to be a legitimate ways and means, right? So for example, from the things which are related to the issue of contagion, you can't come along and say, well, this person, he's asymptomatic and has no disease. You have to keep away from him because, he might transmit a disease to you. This is from the foolishness and idiocy of the modern day, materialists and their pseudosciences, right? This is not from the means, the creational means, right? That you start fearing healthy people without any disease, fearing that he might transmit a disease to you that he doesn't have. It's not from the means. This is stupidity and foolishness, right? This is not from the empirically verified, means. This is utter foolishness to believe in this. Right? So the means have to be legitimate means. They have to be verified empirical means. And this applies all across the board. And that's why within creation, we have the notion of, for example, swindlers and cheats and pseudoscientists and fraudsters and, who lie and deceive people in the worldly affairs, making them believe something is a means when it's not a means. Just as in the religious affairs, there are swindlers and lies and cheats and fraudsters who say, for example, if you come to the tomb of so-and-so and you make a donation of $100 or $1,000 and you put money there, whatever, you are going to get a quick path to salvation. This righteous man is going to argue on your behalf. And so these people who teach these false ways and means are laughing all the way to the bank with their cars and palaces and making thousands upon thousands, selling cheap salvation to ignorant, naive people. And that's what you see among the Jews, amongst the Christians, amongst the Muslims. You see amongst the Christians especially, these guys flying around in these jets costing millions, selling people salvation through Christ. And, these people give them millions upon millions upon millions upon millions. So these are cheats, liars, swindlers, fraudsters in the affairs of religion, right? Who lie to people and tell them that this is a way and a means for you to get to paradise. And they offer them cheap salvation, and it's all lies. So these are not from the ways and means. So this shows what you've learned, what we've been through, shows that as Muslims, we combine between the law, the Asbaab Shar'iyya, the legislated ways and means, and the Asbaab, the Kawniyya, the created ways and means. We combine between those two, and we attain perfect, complete guidance by which we attain our beneficial interests in the life of this world, and by which we enter paradise in the next life. And so, this shows the perfection of the guidance of the prophets and messengers and revelation, in that it accommodates all truth, all beneficial interests, and we are encouraged to explore the world and investigate and achieve our beneficial interests. And we are also encouraged to take the ways and means to, be successful in the hereafter. So the finishing point then is authentic ways and means, right? In religion and the world. So we'll take this point up, inshallah ta'ala, in the next lesson. We'll discuss that a bit further in the next lesson, inshallah ta'ala. So with that, we'll conclude our lesson there for today. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.